Okay, people, we'd like to welcome you here to a celebration of life for my brother, Richard Yonk. And I will read you the program and we'll just continue from there. Opening prayer will be given by James Yonk, his nephew. And the obituary will be read by Selena Woods. Speaker then will be Wendy Lewis. Speaker will be Jeannie Pierce. And then we'll have a musical number by Tristan Lewis. And then Jonathan Yonk will be a speaker, and then we'll have remembrances by the grandkids. Maybe at that point I'll introduce them as they come up, okay?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this opportunity that we have to celebrate Richard and his family, and for the time that we had with him. We'd ask you to please bless us that as we go through this day, that we'll have thy spirit to be with us, and that we can remember the good times and the times that were spent with Richard as a family. Please bless Nancy, that she'll have the strength to get through the day, and the rest of the family. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
This is the obituary for Richard Garland Yonk, June 5th, 1940 to May 27, 2024. Richard Garland Yonk, the comeback kid, passed away peacefully in the early mornings of May 27, 2024, at the age of 83, just missing his birthday for 84. His heart that just refused to give up finally did. Richard was born June 5th, 1940, and grew up scenic Petersboro, Utah. He gained an appreciation and love for land and environment from his father, Merlin H. Yonk, and grandfather, Garland Yonk, working side by side with both of them on the family farm. Richard met and fell in love with his sweetheart, Nancy Con Darley, in 1959. They were married in the Logan Temple on July 1st, 1960. They loved and supported each other throughout their marriage and had many adventures. They raised 3 children together: Wendy Ann Lewis, Elle Jeannie Pierce, Jonathan Merlin Yonk. Richard was a good father, friend, and advisor. He encouraged his children to follow their passions and interests. Richard's love for land and nature fueled his interest in science, and in June of 1963, he earned a Bachelor's of Science degree at Utah State University. He taught science at Logan High School for 4 years and received a National Science Foundation grant to pursue a master's degree in biology at Emporia State University in Kansas. He then moved his family to Fremont, California, where he taught biology for the next 8 years at Irvington High School. Richard loved the students in teaching biology, but Petersboro called him home. He returned to work on the farm in 1977. Richard loved the outdoors. He was a bird watcher, gardener, hunter, and hiked in every national park he could get to. He instilled the love for the outdoors in his family. And we had many wonderful vacations and outings, and learned much about nature, animals, trees, and birds. Other of his hobbies included being a master at Sudoku, Scrabble, and crossword puzzles. His woodworking skills were beyond compare. And there was never a project he was afraid to tackle. His family has been blessed with his fruits of his incredible talent. He was also an avid reader, enjoying especially mystery novels and history, as well as new discoveries in science. Richard will be forever remembered by his wife, Nancy, his daughters, Wendy and Jeannie, and his son, John, his sister, Judith Mon and Linda Batterman, and brother, Reed Yonk, his 6 grandchildren, Michael, Tristan, Selena. Katie, Henry, and Anders, and his 3 great-grandchildren, Rodri, Anira, and Caden, as well as many nieces and nephews. He was preceded in death by his sisters, Merlene Johnson and Rebecca Hadfield, and son-in-law, Michael Pierce. Richard Garland Yonk was a man of integrity, humor, hard work, and adventure. His legacy will continue to inspire. His memory will be forever etched in the hearts of all those who knew and loved him. I loved my pa so much.
First, I'd like to say that we're happy to see everybody here. And as we were out there talking and reminiscing and chatting with everybody, it was noisy. And you know what? He would have loved the noise. He was not one for keeping things super reverent, shall we say. So it was just an observation I had while we were out there. My thing is, I'm just sharing some favorite memories I had of my dad, with my dad. When I was little, he was on a teacher's salary, so anybody who knows anything about that, of course, knows that's not lots of money. And so we did a lot of things that were outdoor. We went to parks, we went to nature reserves, we went occasionally to the zoo too. And his favorite thing to do with us was to tell us what kind of tree this, what kind of flower was this, what kind of bird, and even what kind of insect, which was, fun and interesting. But then he'd quiz you later. And I'll tell you what, I wasn't very good. I have since found I've remembered better than I thought I did. But yeah, so what kind of leaf is that? What leaf is that tree? I don't know, Dad. But he was a lot of fun to do that sort of thing with. And I did retain more than I thought I did, which is good, and passed it on to my kids a little bit. And I get to do that a little bit with them. A little bit, what flower is that? And then they say the same thing. I don't know, Mom. Anyway, but those are the things that I remember most when I was growing up. And he'd point out different things. He had a snake that went across the path once, and he's like, "Ooh, isn't that cool? Look at that snake." And because he had such a matter-of-fact attitude toward nature and towards the things around us, I really wasn't ever afraid of snakes or creepy crawlies or anything like that. Didn't care for mice, but other than that, none of that bothered me, and I always found it very interesting. As I headed into the teenage years, I think my mom was afraid that we would have some sort of a disconnect because, he was teaching school, he was gone a lot. I didn't see him as much as I saw her. And so she kind of arranged this daddy-daughter movie night that would happen about once a month. And I thought it was great. I loved going to the movies with my dad. The thing was, we would often see Disney movies. And if you know my father, he did not care for Disney. And so I think when he went home, there were probably a few, "You owe me for this." And one in specific, and my sister will be nodding, she joined us a little bit later and went to a few. But I think the last one was called Darby O'Gill and the Little People. And she spent most of the time in the lobby because she doesn't like banshees and little leprechauns dancing around like idiots. And so my poor dad was sitting in the movie with me and trying to make sure I was okay and happy. And then he'd have to go out in the lobby to check on Jeannie and make sure she was happy and try to convince her to come back in, which she said no, she was fine out in the lobby. And so here he was going back and forth, trying to make his two daughters happy. I think that was the last one that she joined us in. So all of that happened when we lived in California. And when we moved to Utah, we still sort of kept the movie tradition going, but we did Saturday night matinees on the television, which back in the day when it was regular TV, they had these goofy old movies on Saturday, and we would watch them, and they were the Godzilla movies, and we loved them. We'd laugh and watch Godzilla terrorize the Japanese and the monsters that would come and everything. And he'd make popcorn sometimes for it, although that was usually Sunday night, but he'd make the best popcorn. I loved it when he made popcorn. But we had a great time, and those are great memories, and you should look these old movies up. They are hilarious. So those were fun times. There were also some not so fun times. There's a meme that goes around on Facebook periodically that says, to name a book that made you cry, and then they show a picture of an algebra book. Yeah, that was me. And my poor dad and I had many, many sessions of sitting at the kitchen table while he tried to explain a story problem and try to take me through it so that I could figure out the answer. And it wasn't coming. It just wasn't. I'd get hung up on words or whatever. And in looking back, he was incredibly patient about it. I know he got up a couple of times, and I kind of think now, I wonder if we went to get an aspirin because I was sitting there just crying through the whole thing. But he'd always come back and keep trying and keep trying. Oh, I hated that book, but and there's also this running joke for my siblings and I that my dad had this delusion that I was the athletic one. We don't understand where that came from, but he insists that I was the athletic one out of the three of us, and I've never figured it out, and they haven't either, because they've seen me too. And I remember when he said this to me, I looked at him and I said, "Dad, athletic when?" And he said, "Oh, don't be so hard on yourself." But he never came up with a specific thing as to why I was this athlete. I was a good swimmer. And at one time I helped chase a cow into a pasture, and I kept up with it. That's it, kids. So I have no idea. When I hit the college years, I kind of floundered a little bit. I knew I wanted a major that didn't include math. So I chose English, but then it was like, what do you do with English? So I started out with journalism. I hated the way they wrote, so I didn't want to do journalism. I changed to elementary ed, but guess what? In elementary ed, they do want you to take a math class. So I wasn't real thrilled with that. And so he finally sat me down. He said, "Wendy, what classes are you taking?" And I said, I'm taking English classes. "And why are you taking English classes?" "Because they have books and I get to read." I said, "Okay, so what can we do with that?" And so with that, I became an English major with for secondary ed with a history minor. Books, books, books. I was so happy. I will say I did not become a teacher, though. I went on and became a secretary, but I had bosses that really needed to have an English major, let me tell you. When I got married, I was always appreciative of how interested he was in my kids, in what they were doing, their interest. I was always happy that my husband felt like that he could ask him for advice on things that he was working on. He was always extremely accepting and loving. And there was one day, and all of you who are parents would understand this. You don't know if I don't remember if it was a good day or a bad day. But he looked at me and he told me, "You're a good mom." And is there a better compliment you can get from your parent than that you're a good parent? If you're friends with me on social media, you know that I love sharing puns with my dad. I would send them to my mother because he didn't do Facebook. But she would pass them on, and then she'd text me one that they both liked. And so we had sort of a pun war going on, which was a lot of fun. I think we had similar sense of humor, and I've heard many people say that they just loved my dad's laugh, and I have to agree with that. This last year, to wrap up, Dan and I moved to Forest in Colorado, and I decided to set out bird baths, bird seed, all of that kind of stuff, because as you know, my dad was into birds just a little, and he loved the bird watching, and I decided that it was something that I kind of wanted to do, and I thought my dad would get a kick out of the fact that I was starting to look at these birds. And I would look at them through the binoculars, and then I'd describe them and send the text to my mom and say, okay, tell him this is what I saw. And then from there, we would figure out what the bird was. And I have to admit, one of the first things that I said when I heard that he had died was, who am I going to pet? Who am I going to describe my birds to? And happily, my brother John said that he would take that assignment. But before I got that dreaded phone call, I had looked out at my bird feeder, and there was a mourning dove. And I hadn't had a mourning dove at my feeder before. And so I thought that was kind of cool. And I thought, well, I'll have to text my mom after I eat breakfast and tell Dad I saw a mourning dove. But then I got the phone call, and I didn't get to do that. And after we had talked a little bit, and I had cried a lot, I looked out the window again at that bird feeder, and I thought about that mourning dove. And I said out loud, love you, Dad. I'll miss you. And I gave him back the same compliment he gave me. You were a good dad.
Lessons from my dad. My dad and I share a love for science and a curiosity about the world and how things work. When I was young, my dad would go duck and pheasant hunting. Dad would bring the birds back home, and sometimes I'd come out to the side porch where I would get a science lesson in dissection. He would show me all the organs as he took them out and tell me what they did and how they connected to each other. I found it fascinating and loved every minute of it. When I was in grade school, we lived in Fremont, California, and my dad taught high school biology. Sometimes we would pick up Dad from the high school. If I was lucky, we would go inside, and Dad would let me see a special room that was full of specimen jars. I loved looking at those jars and trying to figure out what was inside them. I thought it was amazing that he had a room full of jars with specimens in them. One year, my dad's biology class's science experiments used white rats. Some of the rats were controls. At the end of the experiment, he brought home the control rat. She became my pet. I named her Rachel. Rachel would crawl all over me. I loved Rachel. My cousins mostly thought she was pretty icky, but I thought she was really sweet. I enjoyed having a pet rat and thought it was pretty cool that it came from my dad's high school biology class. This is my version of the movie night. Memories are funny things. They're similar. After my brother John was born, Friday would be daddy-daughter's night. We often went to the movies. I enjoyed some of the movies, slept through others, and one really scared me. I remember telling my dad that I needed to go to the bathroom, and then just hanging out in the lobby afterwards. Eventually, how I remember it is that Dad sent out poor Wendy to find me. On one of our next daddy-daughter nights, we went to the movies again, and they were showing the same film. Once again, I was scared. Again, I told my dad that I really needed to go to the bathroom. This time he sent Wendy with me so I couldn't hang out in the lobby. I think I tried to get Wendy to stay in the lobby with me. She got pretty irritated with her little sister. When we went home, I was pretty angry at my dad, and I wrote down the name of the movie and that I would never go see that movie again. Now, you may think this was pretty mean of my father to take me to the same scary movie twice. Well, I've seen the movie as an adult, but why it scared me, I have no idea. The movie is Darby O'Gill and the Little People, and it isn't scary at all. I know there are some leprechaun movies that are scary, but this isn't one of them. Dad and I would laugh about how scared I was of the movie and try to figure out what it was that freaked me out. We still don't know. Maybe Wendy does. In California, we frequently went to San Francisco because there was always something to do there. One of our favorite places was the zoo. Somehow, my parents always got lost on the way to the zoo. This was way before navigation systems and cell phones that tell you where to turn. You had to use actual paper maps and use the highway signs to navigate. My mom would blame my dad for not listening to her instructions, and my dad would blame my mom for giving him the wrong instructions. My sister and I would be trying not to laugh in the back seat, as this happened every single time. Eventually, we would get to the zoo, and I would be able to see Monkey Island, which was my favorite. I really wanted to be the zookeeper of Monkey Island when I was young. Another favorite place to go was Golden Gate Park. I loved the planetarium and the aquarium. As a child, I didn't appreciate the DeYoung Art Museum as much. I thought it was boring and full of old paintings, old clothes, and old furniture that I couldn't touch. I remember standing in long lines forever to see Van Gogh paintings, which at the time, I didn't think were that great. As an adult, I would love to stand in that long line to see those Van Gogh paintings. After I met my husband, Michael, we would make trips out to California to catch a weekend baseball series between the Oakland A's and the Baltimore Orioles, and then spend time exploring San Francisco. My mom and dad and John joined us on one of these trips. We went to Golden Gate Park and the DeYoung Museum. By this time, my dad was a woodworker who made wonderful furniture. Much of my house is furnished with things he made. My father liked a challenge and was always interested in new plans that were different from anything else he'd made. He was always interested in how the furniture was put together with the joints and the corners, and liked trying new, old ways of building things. While we were in the DeYoung looking at their beautiful furniture collection that I used to find boring, curiosity got the better of my dad. He was looking at one of the chest of drawers and got really interested in it and wanted to see how the corners and joints were made. So without thinking, he pulled open one of the drawers. Of course, that set off a silent alarm, and pretty immediately a security guard showed up. My father sheepishly told the security guard he was just interested in how the chest of drawer was built and what the corners and joints looked like. The guard warned him about touching the furniture and told him to not do it again. Something I'm pretty sure he told me as a little girl in that same museum. When we would visit Golden Gate Park, we always ended our day with a visit to the Japanese tea garden. We would get a pot of tea and a plate of cookies. We would pour the tea into tiny teacups and enjoy the small cookies. This started my lifelong love of tea. I have at least 1 cup of tea every morning, usually more. A few years ago, my sister gave my parents a set of National Park teas from Simpson and Vale Tea Company. It came with a bunch of different teas representing different national parks. When I visited at Christmas, my parents shared the tea with me. The first one I tried was Yellowstone tea, which had a wonderful smell and taste. Before I left, I'd also tried Rocky Mountain National Park tea, which was also really good. I went home and ordered some teas from Simpson and Vale. My father and I would compare notes on the different teas we tried and whether we liked them or not. Whenever I stayed at my parents' house, he would often have a new tea for me to try. It became a routine that he would make hot water for the two of us for tea in the morning. He would have 2 tea bags for me since he knew I would want more than 1 cup of tea and didn't like it when I reused the tea bag. On one of their cruises, my mom and dad had taken a class on proper tea brewing. The temperatures for different leaves, how long to steep, and why steeping too long brought out bitterness, among other things. My dad became quite particular about the brewing of tea and how long it steeped. I am not particular, and we would often joke about me leaving the tea bag in too long. Dad, Mom, and I also got so that we like to have afternoon tea. Dad would make us all tea, and Mom would have cookies or cheese and crackers for us to enjoy. This past Thanksgiving, my dad was still recovering from his long hospital stay in the fall. He was pretty weak, and we hadn't had any of our tea times. The last day I was there, he asked me to make afternoon tea for him. I made my dad and I a cup of tea with a plate of cookies and enjoyed a little chat, just the two of us. I will always think of him fondly when I'm making afternoon tea from now on. I decided to come up for Memorial Weekend and spend time with Mom and Dad, just a quick overnight, Saturday to Sunday. My father made me tea that Sunday morning. With 2 tea bags for my 2 cups of tea. It was Rocky Mountain National Park tea. After breakfast, we all did a word anagram game that we commonly played. All possible words you can make from a word that they give you. We checked the words we'd found against the list of possible words. I was visiting with my parents more than looking for words, and my score was really terrible. Dad always had extra words that weren't on the list that he was sure counted. Mom would have to look them up on her phone and check the Scrabble dictionary. Sometimes we all vetoed the word and Mom didn't bother looking it up. If I remember correctly, Dad had the most correct words that morning and won the game. My last memories of my dad are of us fixing irrigation hoses that afternoon, putting cages around the tomatoes, and watching the hummingbirds chase each other away from the feeder. We talked about what I planted in my garden and that he thought I needed more tomatoes. We talked about Henry's graduation and how proud and excited he was for him. We talked about Katie and her upcoming graduation and her job prospects. We talked about big things and little things and nothing at all. It was an ordinary day. It was a lovely day. I still love science, and I'm still curious about the world around me, just like my dad. As a science researcher, I've studied how immune cells interact with each other and different organs in our bodies and make immune responses. I've also dissected lots of mice. I continue to learn and discover. I have seen how curiosity can sometimes get you in trouble, but can also help you discover new passions. I've learned to laugh at myself and face my fears. I've learned that getting lost isn't the end of the world. Eventually you get there. All lessons from my dad.
I plan to say a lot of nice things about my dad today. He was pretty awesome. But my dad would not want you to leave today thinking he was a saint. So I'm going to start with a list of his flaws before I get into how awesome he was. My dad did not like chocolate. As a kid, I remember the Neapolitan ice cream in the freezer. The vanilla, the strawberry, that was for dad. For the kids, that was the chocolate. We thought it was an okay. My dad liked liver and onions. My son will never know the agony of sitting at the table and looking at a piece of liver knowing that it is not fit for consumption. Dad could enjoy a meal, sometimes to excess. When this happened, either the thing he liked least at the meal was the thing causing him the distress. This would be turkey at Thanksgiving, or it was my mom's fault for letting him eat too much, and that would be grandma's barbecue or chili. When my dad got dressed for the day, that included footwear. And back in the day, that meant boots. The room under the dining room was a place where all of the kids slept at one point or another. And my dad, while fixing breakfast, would clunk back and forth over the dining room floor. Clunk, clunk, clunk. He was our own personal alarm clock. He liked to get up around 6:30. My dad hated outdoor Christmas lights. Well, he hated the ones that he was asked to put up. And Christmas just wasn't Christmas unless there was a little saltiness in it. Once my dad was out of Cache Valley, his ability to navigate anywhere became pretty suspect. And in truth, this could be both of my parents. As already been mentioned, they could get lost. And it wasn't just in San Francisco where they could get lost. We would go to the state fair and somehow get lost. And we would go to Hogle Zoo and somehow get lost. And this trait attribute that they have, they managed to still continue. They got lost on a way to Anders flag football game. So it's not even when they have navigational tools, they can just get lost. Lastly, my dad would always comment of kids speaking at their parents' funerals and call it macabre. Here I am, talking at his funeral. Thanks a lot, Dad. So that's about it. Sometimes he wasn't jolly. Sometimes he was a little lost, a little heavy-footed, had some terrible taste in foods, occasionally overate, and could be a smidge hypocritical. Now for the good stuff. Growing up, this isn't even the sad part. Growing up, I always wanted to be my dad. He wore boots. I should wear boots. He drives tractors. I should drive tractors. He likes birds. I'm going to like birds. He likes to quiz people. I should quiz people. He's a biologist. I should be a biologist. Here are the things that I want you to know about my dad. First, some simple truths. Remember, these are his simple truths, not necessarily mine. First one is you can judge how good a breakfast is by how attentive the server is at keeping the coffee cup full. Steak and meat in general should be well done. Never trust a pasta or potato salad at a potluck unless Grandma Yonk or my mom made it. Enjoying puns is a sign of intelligence, and science is real. Dad was a man who knew how to work. During hay season, our morning often began at 4 a.m. He would get us up and we would go to Crossroads Restaurant in Tremont. It's the only place that would be open that early to have breakfast. We needed to be in the fields baling hay by 5 or 5:30 so that we could bale it while the dew was on the hay. He would generally work from about 8 in the morning till 5 or 6 at night. He was able to instill in me the importance of work. Some Friday nights, I would stay overnight at friends' houses. Early the next morning, he would be there in the driveway, waiting to get me so that I could go back to work. I overheard the parents one time say, "The kids did not sleep last night. They were up all night." And he said, "John knew he had to work in the morning. Go get him up. It's time to work." Dad was almost always working cattle every time it was his birthday. It was time to brand and tag and get the cattle up into the mountains. In fact, I smiled a little bit when James asked me if I wanted to do cattle this past weekend because it was time to get the cattle up into the mountains. And sure enough, it's right around Dad's birthday, just tomorrow. Holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, he always had to feed cattle. There was no time off. And one year he made me do it on Christmas, and I was pretty put out about it. And we went up to the barn, and little did I know that my parents had bought me a puppy that year. And it's one of the best Christmas presents I've had. Working with cattle sometimes puts you in positions you never think will happen to you. I remember Jen watching me run through a corral in irrigation boots, trying hard to get in front of some cows. Mid-run, one boot falls off, the other one stays on, and there you are running through, one boot on, one sock on, right through the muck. My dad had a similar experience, but it was in Logan. To get some cows going where he wanted to go, he started running, and his belt betrayed him, and soon he was running with his pants around his ankles. This is when my dad started wearing suspenders. Dad had a love for nature and animals. Growing up, we always had dogs or cats, or dogs and cats in the house. We took in some stray cats. We took in an abandoned dog. He helped me with my 4-H projects of steers and hogs. He would point out wildlife all the time. Driving across the valley, he would quiz me about birds. First, I didn't really take to it, but day after day, it was, "What's that bird?" And then pretty soon you want to try and impress your dad. And so soon you tell him, "That's an ibis, that's an avocet, and here's why." And this love of nature soon began to be something that we could share with each other. I would go on a birding trip to Arizona, and I'd report back to him all the cool birds I'd seen. He would take a trip to Europe, and he would report back the cool birds that he saw. And a few times we would go together. We went twice to Homer, Alaska, to their bird festival, which always happened around Mother's Day. So my mom was very kind to allow that to be our time together. When we went there, we once went with Wendy when her family was stationed up in Alaska, and we returned once with Jen and Mom. And we saw some really cool shorebirds. We went on some cool trips out onto the ocean, and we really enjoyed being with other people that were just as excited to see these birds as we were. When I came up to the house on the day that he passed, I looked out into the backyard where the bird feeders are and saw a western tanager. My first instinct was to go inside, tell my dad to come take a look. I'm gonna miss that. It wasn't just nature that my dad was observant about. In my time at home, it took me a long time to realize that my dad did in fact read. My mother and sisters had novels all over the house. My dad would talk about putting the books away and telling them it's not a damn library. He didn't read books then. He read the newspaper, every article from the front to the back. He read magazines, National Geographic, Smithsonian, Natural History, Time. He knew what was happening in science and politics, and especially he knew what the 7-day forecast was. At my house, a typical television night would be the 6 o'clock news. the McNeil Air Report, nature and or mystery, the 10 o'clock news, just to make sure the weather hadn't changed in the last 4 hours. Dad loved to vacation. I didn't know this so much when I was younger. The farm had a pretty tight leash on his time, but we would get a good week-long vacation every summer. We often went to Yellowstone. To get to Yellowstone, for some reason, you needed to get up at 4 a.m. You had to drive 2.5 or 3 hours and then stop for breakfast, and then drive the rest of the way to the park. My dad wanted to squeeze as much fun as possible into a week, and so we needed to get up early and get going. I thought this is how everyone would do vacation, and I found out later in life that that's not true. Some people want to relax and chill. It makes me antsy. Once he retired, he really got into vacationing. Traveled the world with my mom. This is when he got into reading mystery novels about where he would be traveling into. I think being a little bit homebound by all of his health issues was probably one of the hardest things he had to deal with. About 2 years ago, I was able to go with my family and mom and dad to Yellowstone one last time. We had a great time, and we saw lots of wildlife and enjoyed watching those geysers. Dad was not great at being idle. He would drive my mom crazy, going back and forth to Logan 2, 3, 4 times a day. He ended up finding a new outlet for the time he had on his hands. He began to do woodworking. At first, small projects would get done, and then bigger, and then more intricate, and then bigger and more intricate projects would be done. When you go to my parents' house, it's hard to find anything made out of wood that wasn't made by him. A lot of credit still needs to go to my mom on these projects, though. She finished all of them. She still keeps them looking lovely today. When I was dating Jen, he helped me make a jewelry box, and then a canoe bookcase, and then a shelf with a heart in it. I did a lot of the cuts for these, but my dad was the one who made it all possible. We now have bookcases and blanket chests in our house that he has made as well. When we bought our home, he came down and he helped make a pergola in our backyard. My dad was a teacher. I never knew him when he was a paid teacher, but he never lost his love of imparting knowledge and quizzing. Started with birds driving across the valley. Later on, the Asimov quiz would be a family favorite. If we were on a hike, my dad would ask, "What tree is this?" I now quiz Jen and Anders the same way. He loved puzzles. He loved crosswords, Sudokus, scriptoquotes. He loved games, checkers and Scrabble and Uno, Clue, Pit. He may have made Jeannie cry at checkers, but somehow him playing to win just made it so I wanted to get better. And I still fondly remember the day I got him to flip the Scrabble board over. I will say, watching him play against grandkids, he got soft. Dad was a builder of houses, tables, nightstands, shelves, knickknacks, haystacks, and fences. He loved to build and create. He built a great life for himself. He built a marriage of almost 64 years with my mom. With my mom, he built a family. As a teacher, he raised us. He taught us. He watched us. He helped us. He advised us. He loved us. I love him. This is the sad part, and I miss him. I will always remember him. And his example of how to build and live a life full of happiness.
Okay, now we will have remembrances by the grandchildren. Michael Lewis, Katie Pierce, Henry Pierce, and Anders Yonk. And if there's any time left at the end, if anybody wants to come up and say something from memory, that would be good. And then we'll go from there, and then I'll have a closing prayer.
So I was asked to talk about a memory of Paul. I had a great touching memory with him the last time we were face to face that I'll remember forever. However, I can't even think of it without tearing up. So I'm not. That one's not going to work. So instead, I'll talk about a collection of memories that remind me of my relationship with Pa. When my grandma Lewis died, I felt guilty that I wasn't more upset. I loved her, and she was a great grandmother, but losing her didn't hurt the way that I thought it would if I lost Grandma Pa. You see, I've always had a unique relationship with my Yonk side of the family, and that's why it's different. You see, as long as I can remember, when I would go and visit Grandma Pa's, I would sneak into the kitchen and I'd listen to the adults talk. Part of the problem was toys weren't nearly as interesting as the laughing that was going on in there. And I'd get really annoyed at my brother when he would try to drag me back to away from the conversation and back to playing with toys. I almost never joined in the conversations. But listening to them, I learned who each member of the family was. I knew and know them on a personal level from the stories that they tell about themselves and each other. I loved how Pa over-exaggerated his stubbornness to the point that whatever stance he was taking, it was now absurd, and he would still pretend for a second that it still made sense. And since the stories really weren't meant for me, I learned a lot about my family, who they were, warts and mistakes and all. Speaking of mistakes, there's one story of Pa that I have kept thinking about for the past week, and I don't really know why it popped in my head. I haven't thought about it in decades, but it has made me smile every time I thought of it. See, when I was 11 or 12, Pa took me and Tristan to go help him feed the cows. After we were done, he told me and Tristan to pick out a cow, and that cow would be our cow. So I picked a cow, 106, since 6 was my favorite number. A year went by, and we came back for Christmas, and I went to help Pa with his cows again. I asked him about my cow. And he was surprised that I remembered our conversation from the previous year. He asked me what cow it was, and I told him that it was 106. And we both looked for several minutes before it became apparent that the cow was no longer there. He muttered that he wondered where that cow had gone, while I continued to look for it. But not like you would have expected a farmer who had just lost a cow to look for it. Meanwhile, I was 12 or 13 now, and I fully understood that Pa did not have a herd of pet cows. However, we spent several minutes still looking for the cow that both of us knew was not there. Now, how can this be the story that I thought of for Pa? Well, I have never thought of him when it came to traditional grandpa stuff. Sure, he did those things like give me treats and presents, or listen to me ramble about superheroes, Ninja Turtles, or Power Rangers. But it was knowing him on a human level that mattered most to me. And it was a very human moment. Grandfather and grandchild pretending for the other person to look for a lousy cow that was no longer. I love my grandpa, and I'm gonna miss him.
Obviously, I'm not Katie. She is still in England, so I will play you what she has sent.
Hi everybody, I'm Katie, one of Richard's granddaughters. Although I truly wish I could be there today, I'm currently finishing up my studies in England and I couldn't be there. So here's my speech on a video. One quote that reminds me of my grandfather is the saying, "To be loved is to be seen." To me, this means that someone who loves you recognizes and accommodates for small parts of your life that others might miss. My grandpa was exceptionally good at this in many ways. He would take me and my brother to Arctic Circle because he knew we loved it, and he would cheer me up after a bad game by taking me to get donuts or ice cream. And always offered to play Uno with me, even though he hated my way of playing it. These are just some of the ways he would show his love for me, and as with most things, I did not truly appreciate it until I look back on it now. I also had some great trips with him, and some of my favorite memories of him were when we were on vacation. I specifically remember him telling me that hiking the Grand Canyon without any preparation was probably not a good idea, but I could absolutely do it if I prepared more. I also loved hearing about his own travels with my grandma, and I think that they have both inspired me to go out and see the world, which is some of the best advice I've taken. He would tell me about all of the amazing things he saw and about different cultures, food, and people he met. He inspired me and pushed me forward in everything I did, from school to soccer and beyond. Today, I would like to celebrate how good he was at showing his love for others and his ability to inspire those around him. When I walk across the stage to get my bachelor's degree this summer, it will be with him in mind.
The world got a little smaller today. I lost my grandpa, some of you lost a family member, and some of you lost a good friend. Whatever he was to you, we can all say he loved all he met and brought happiness and laughter to us. Me and my grandpa had a different relationship than most. I grew up most of my life without a father, so finding a father figure was hard for me. But my grandpa filled that role the moment my dad passed. I'm so grateful and glad that I knew him for so long and got to experience special memories and moments with him. To me, losing my grandpa is like losing a piece of your childhood. His jokes there always to make you laugh, and watching my grandma and grandpa have the most beautiful relationship filled with love and care for all their friends and family. I have so many amazing memories of my grandma or grandpa, but my favorite is when he taught me how to drive because my mom would have a panic attack every time she got in the car with me. She still does. Anyways, he took me to the back roads to learn how to drive off road. We listened to some good music and laughed when I almost hit a ditch. I promise I'm not a bad driver. Another memory I recall is when I went to the Grand Canyon and me and him sat on a bench and laughed at all the unprepared people going on the hikes. If you didn't know, which you probably all do, my grandpa loved Angie's. If there was such a thing as being a local to the locals, that was probably him. I'll miss going to breakfast with him, especially in college. I loved how he took good care of the lawn, even at his age. The front yard and the back always looked like a palace. It was such a fun time driving up the road and seeing all the pretty flowers and freshly cut grass in the springtime. My grandpa always taught me hard work, doing chores, and helping in the yard, doing those dumb homework books in the summer. But he always said to me that with hard work comes something good. Most of the time, it was just a trip to the hardware store for him or a sweet treat, but you get the point. I'm beyond grateful that he was able to teach me so many things and help raise me. My grandpa was always such a humorous person. One time when he was teaching me how to shoot a gun, he was shooting in the air, and I accidentally hit a bird, my second try. I then asked Grandpa, why is the bird flying so low? And he said, oh, it just needs some food, as we both watched it fall to the ground, and apparently the bird's starving. During Christmas time, he always say he wasn't gonna wake up early for presents. Little me, and probably my sister too, would always stress about it, just to learn that every year he was up before me, barely awake just to see me smile and me and my sister smile. Lastly, though he may never be longer with us in body, his spirit will live on with the lessons he taught us, the love he shared, and all the memories we hold dear. Rest in peace, Richard Garland Yonk, you we dearly miss but never forgotten. Love you, Gramps.
I was asked to give a talk today, so I decided to talk about some good memories I have with Pa. A fun thing we did was farm camp. I would come up for a week in the summer and play with Chago and help around the house. In the mornings, we would play a game where you would try to make words out of a main word. For example, if you take the main word grandfather, you could make words inherited, fragrant, arranged, tanager, grander, and many more. This usually led to an argument between Graham and Pa on whether a word counted or not. I would have to look it up on Graham's phone to see who was right and who was wrong. He also made a lot of furniture. Most of the wood furniture in my house was made by Pa. Most memorably for me was a special chest in Grandpa's living room that had a bunch of drawers that the grandchildren could open and find money and fruit snacks that Graham hid there. The money usually went towards our Nerf gun to play with. A couple of years ago, we went up to Yellowstone in the spring and stayed at Old Faithful Snow Lodge. We had fun there seeing the geysers and animals and playing games at night. One night, we were at dinner and we were all ordering when it was Pa's turn. He accidentally ordered a vegan sausage. Before we could say anything, the waitress was gone, so no one said anything to Pa. We kind of just looked at each other. After we ate it, Dad asked, "How's that sausage?" Pa replied, "Not great, and you'll never know that he ate that vegan sausage." My family has a tradition of naming the first son that is born after his grandpa. My pa's middle name was his grandpa's name, Garland. My dad is named after his grandpa, Merlin, and named after my pa, Richard. I love my pa, and I'm proud to be able to have his name.
Thank you. To sum it up, if anybody wants to come up and say something, fine. I'd like to say just a few words to kind of sum it up a little bit. One thing about my brother is that he did love farming. He loved ranching, he loved cattle and growing crops. He would go out, I remember days we'd walk out in the field and just look at how the crop was coming for the coming year and talk about how getting it harvested and whatnot. But he did love to teach. He taught all the time. And I don't know how many times he would tell me the Latin word for something, and I still don't know the Latin words, but he would tell me the Latin word for an insect or something like that. And it was very fun to learn from him. And he did like birds, especially except for turkeys. He did not like turkeys. They'd come in and eat his bird feed out the back door. He'd been known to maybe execute a few of them. But he loved the outdoors. He loved to go hunting. We'd do that all the time when I was growing up and when we were living there. We hunted pheasants, ducks, deer. That was generally our October. So if you had a birthday in October, it wasn't a good time. Maybe for John, because he'd go with us. He became a woodworker, and I don't know how he became so talented at it, because I'm still not that talented. I don't have it in me. But he became a craftsman extraordinaire. He was not just a woodworker. He was good. I'm just grateful for the hand-me-downs that when he was ready to move on to something else, he said, "I'm gonna go get rid of this. Want to haul it to the DI?" And no, we didn't never haul it to the DI. No, we kept it. He became a world traveler, which was a surprise. I never thought he would be the traveler that he was, but he did love to go. And I think they went on all four corners of the earth, as far as I know. They went everywhere. He loved learning. He always was trying to learn something. I think that's why he did crossword puzzles so much. He was a learner. And he was also a fighter. from the first time he had his heart attack way back to right up until, Memorial Day. You never knew. He was always the comeback kid. And I will miss him greatly. And I know the family will miss him too, because he was always such a solid force for all of us there in Yonkville out there. The family, Nancy's family and Richard's family, would like to express thanks to those that helped, James and Danny, for being there when they needed them, Melissa and David, and for Kyle, for us that lived there, and for all the neighbors and all the people that would stop in and visit. We're very grateful for them. He also, the last thing I think I want to say is that he did love his family. He talked about them all. He loved his kids, his grandkids, and especially he loved his wife. And he was grateful to be there. So now, anybody else wants to speak, that's fine. If not, we'll have a closing prayer. And then I think we'll have a luncheon at the men's station at 12:30. Okay? Dan?
Our Father in heaven, we're here to say goodbye to one of our favorite guys. We ask thee, Father, that thou watch over him and watch over Nancy. We ask thee that thou wilt bless him and guide him on the other side. And we ask thee, Father, mostly we ask that thou will remember that he is thy son and he is our Father. And we say this in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, amen.